We have seen that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. We have explored how ungodliness and unrighteousness refer to the Ten Commandments. Ungodliness having a reference to the first 4 commandments: thou shalt have no other gods before me, thou shalt make no carved images, thou shalt not take God's name in vain, and then remembering the Sabbath, which all have to do with understanding the correct character of God. Why is this so important? Because there is a law in the Bible that we cannot escape. It is found in Micah 4:5, and it says, "For all people walk, each in the name of his God." Our concept of God will determine how we walk, how we behave ourselves, how we function within our society, how we treat each other, and how we perceive God to see us. How we see God, then, will ultimately determine how we keep the last 6 commandments, which have to do with how we relate to each other on a human level. There are really only 2 options for human beings in terms of how we perceive God to be. We can either see him through the lens of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or through the lens of the tree of life. If we behold God through the dualistic lens of the gods of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, our characters will have the duality of good and evil. But if we understand God through Jesus' revelation of his character, by beholding him in whom there is no darkness at all, we will become pure and holy as God is. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 3, Paul indicates that there are 2 ways to keep the law. He says, "Clearly you are an epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of the flesh, that is, the heart." The law sits right in the center of the great controversy between God and Satan. The issue was the law. But the 10 Commandments were given by God. However, Satan uses the 10 Commandments to promote his law of good and evil. Listen to the words of Paul in Romans chapter 7. "What shall we say then? Is the law sin? Are the 10 Commandments sin? Certainly not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin except through the 10 Commandments, through the law. For I would not have known covetousness unless the law had said, 'You shall not covet.'" Clearly, it's talking about the 10 Commandments. But then Paul goes on to make a stunning statement. He says, "But sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire. For apart from the law, sin was dead." This means that apart from the law, from God's law, from the 10 Commandments, Satan could not implement his moral law of reward and punishment. He needed God's law in order to use his method of keeping order in the world. Therefore, apart from the law, sin was dead. Satan took opportunity of the 10 Commandments to install his moral law of good and evil, of reward and punishment. Back in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul goes on to compare the 2 ways of keeping the law. And he shows how Satan took opportunity of the law to implement his system of condemnation and death. Our sufficiency is from God, who also made us sufficient as ministers of the new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, kills, but the Spirit, the tree of life, gives life. He goes on, "But if the ministry of death, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, written and engraved on stones, was glorious," in other words, keeping the law through the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, "so that the children of Israel could not look steadily at the face of Moses because of the glory of his countenance, which glory was passing away, as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is passing away. As we know, there will be only the tree of life in the new heaven and the new earth. How will the ministry of the Spirit, which is keeping the law in God's way, not be more glorious?" Now Paul goes on to enlarge the meaning of these 2 covenants by saying, "For if the ministry of condemnation, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the reward and punishment system, had glory, the ministry of righteousness, of God's unconditional agape love, exceeds much more in glory. For even what was made glorious had no glory in this respect, because of the glory that excels. For if what is passing away was glorious, again the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which will not be in the new heaven and in the new earth, what remains, which is the tree of life, is much more glorious. But sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire." And the commandment, the 10 commandments, which was to bring life, I found to bring death. For sin, taking occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it killed me. Therefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy and just and good. And then Paul goes on to explain, I find then a law, the law of reward and punishment, that evil is present with me in my moral makeup, the one who wills to do good, who wills to do God's unconditional love towards everyone. For I delight in the law of God according to the inward man, but I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my members. Paul then gives us the answer to this problem. How can we conquer this? O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord, because Jesus shows us the living God, the God of life, the God in whom there is no darkness, no mixture of good and evil, the God of unconditional agape love, in whom there is no condemnation.